Elysium's madness. Two men wake up in a hypersleep pod with no memory of who they are, why they are there, or that the ship around them has been a tomb for nearly 1,000 years. That is the opening of Pandorum, the 2009 horror film directed by Christian Alvart and starring Dennis Quaid and Ben Foster. After overpopulation drains Earth of its resources, humanity builds an interstellar ark called the Elysium to carry 60,000 colonists on a planned 123-year voyage to an Earth-like world named Tanis. Corporal Bauer, played by Foster, and Lieutenant Peyton, played by Quaid, wake from hypersleep, disoriented and amnesiac, unable to remember the mission they were sent to complete. The film's title is its own invented condition, a space-induced delirium that breeds paranoia and hallucinations. Through murals scrawled across the ship, the backstory comes into focus. When Earth was destroyed in some unknown catastrophe, a crewman named Gallo learned that humanity's home was gone, developed Pandorum, went insane, and murdered his own crew. He then induced the same madness in the passengers, seeding the feral human hunters that now stalk the ship's descendants. And then comes the twist. Peyton is actually Gallo. The real Peyton died long ago, and Gallo, having climbed into Peyton's pod, woke with amnesia and believed himself to be the other man. The final revelation is the gut punch. The ship's log shows 923 years have passed, not the planned 123. The Elysium crash-landed in the ocean of Tanis centuries ago, and its survivors never knew they had already arrived. The mission was not just abandoned here, it was erased while the ship quietly completed the journey on its own. Earthship Ark. A young man steps outside his farming village and discovers the sky is a metal ceiling, and his entire world is one dome inside a 50-mile-wide starship nobody remembers boarding. That is the premise of The Star Lost, a Canadian television series that ran from 1973 to 1974, created by Harlan Ellison, who was so unhappy with the result that he disowned it and took the pseudonym Cordwainer Bird. The ship is the Earthship Ark, a colossal generation vessel made of hundreds of separate biosphere domes, each one carrying a different human culture toward a new world after a catastrophe on Earth. Centuries into the voyage, a disaster killed the crew and knocked the Ark off course, leaving the steering mechanism broken and the ship drifting toward a collision with a star. The populations inside the domes have forgotten they are aboard a ship at all, each one convinced its dome is the whole world. The protagonists, Devon, Rachel, and Garth, flee their Amish-like dome of Cypress Corners, discover the truth, and set off across the Ark, searching for anyone who can correct its course. This is the Forgotten Generation ship, rendered dome by dome, each a sealed amnesiac society, showing how a population loses the mission when knowledge itself stops passing between generations. Saturn's last forests. When the Order comes to destroy the last forests in existence and abandon the mission, one botanist decides the orders no longer matter. Silent Running, released in 1972 and directed by Douglas Trumbull, stars Bruce Dern as that botanist. In its future, Earth's forests are extinct, and the last living specimens are preserved inside geodesic domes attached to freighters stationed near Saturn. The crews are ordered to jettison and destroy the domes and return the ships to ordinary commercial service, canceling the conservation mission entirely. Freeman Lowell refuses. He kills his crewmates, fakes an explosion, and pilots his ship into deep space to keep the last forest alive, tended only by the drones Huey, Dewey, and Louie. The mission here is not forgotten by accident, but deliberately canceled from the top. It is the inverse of the trope, a crew ordered to forget, and the lone holdout who won't. The Axiom Drift. Humanity left Earth for a 5-year cruise and stayed in space for 7 centuries, until nobody aboard remembered the planet was supposed to be their home. That is the quiet tragedy buried inside WALL-E, the 2008 Pixar film directed by Andrew Stanton. The megacorporation by and large evacuated humanity onto luxury starliners, the flagship being the Axiom, while robots stayed behind to clean a trash-buried Earth. The Axiom had been running for 700 years by the time the film opens, set in the year 2805. The catch is a secret. By and Large's chief executive, Shelby Forthright, ordered the autopilots to follow Directive A113, never to return to Earth, after deciding the planet was too toxic to reclaim. The autopilot, known as Otto, enforces that directive even when the ship's captain wants to go home. hiding the truth from generation after generation. Over the centuries, the humans devolved into sedentary, screen-addicted passengers who forgot Earth entirely and never once questioned why the temporary voyage never ended. It is the family-friendly face of this premise, but the Axiom is a textbook forgotten mission generation ship, the return home erased by a buried corporate order and 700 years of comfort. By the way, if you're enjoying this so far, I post videos like this all the time, and a subscribe would genuinely help the channel out. Thanks. The Hollow World. The Enterprise races to stop an asteroid on a collision course, then discovers the asteroid is hollow, inhabited, and steered by a people who have no idea they are flying through space. This is Star Trek, the original series, in the episode titled, "For the World is Hollow, and I Have Touched the Sky," from the 3rd season, first broadcast on November 8, 1968. It was written by Rick Villartz and directed by Tony Leader. The Enterprise intercepts an asteroid heading for a Federation world, and finds that it is a hollowed-out generation ship called Yonada. Yonada was built by the Fabrini, a people whose sun went nova, who sealed their survivors inside the asteroid ship to ride out a journey lasting 10,000 years. After all that time aboard, the descendants no longer know they are on a ship. They believe Yonada is their entire planet. Their society is ruled by the Oracle, which is really the ship's central computer, and it kills anyone who learns the truth, enforcing obedience through implanted devices called Instruments of Obedience. The episode's strange, beautiful title comes from an old man who once climbed Yonada's forbidden mountains, touched the metal of the sky, and was executed for daring to say that the world is hollow. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy have to correct the ship's drifting course before it strikes the inhabited planet, while the priestess Natira and her people remain ignorant of their true nature. This is the canonical Star Trek take on the Forgotten Generation ship, a whole civilization that mistook the inside of a spacecraft for the universe, ruled by a machine pretending to be a god. The Blue. A crew of teenagers raised to colonize another world discover they have been drugged into obedience their whole lives, and when they stop, the mission collapses into savagery. That is Voyagers, the 2021 film written and directed by Neil Berger, starring Ty Sheridan, Lily Rose Depp, Fionn Whitehead, and Colin Farrell. In the year 2063, with Earth's habitability failing, a crew of genetically selected teenagers launches on an 86-year multi-generational voyage to colonize a distant exoplanet, and the colonists who actually arrive will be their grandchildren. To keep the young crew docile and focused, they are secretly dosed with an emotional suppressant called the Blue. When two of them realize they are being drugged and stop drinking it, every suppressed instinct comes roaring back, and the ship fractures into tribal violence and a brutal struggle for power. The adult supervisor, Richard, played by Colin Farrell, dies, and with the last authority figure gone, the mission discipline disintegrates entirely. What Voyagers shows is a mission lost not to time, but to human nature. The moment the controls come off, the generation ship's purpose evaporates, and the crew reverts to a primal state, essentially Lord of the Flies, set aboard a starship. Mondas Below. A colony ship hangs at the edge of a black hole, where time runs so differently that the people at the bottom have lived, bred, and decayed across centuries, while the top deck barely aged at all. This is Doctor Who, in the 2-part finale, World Enough and Time, and The Doctor Falls, first broadcast in 2017 and written by Stephen Moffat. An enormous colony ship is trapped in the gravity well of a black hole, producing extreme time dilation between the front of the vessel and the rear. A crew sent to the back to restart the engines became stranded, and for them, centuries passed while only minutes ticked by at the front. The stranded population bred, multiplied, and faced a slow collapse on the lower decks. To survive the failing ship, they began converting themselves into cybernetic survivors, and that process is the origin story of the Mondasian Cybermen, the very first Cyberman design, dating back to 1966. By the time the Doctor's companions descend into the ship's depths, the original colonization mission is long forgotten, replaced by a horrifying medical program that turns humans into machines. This is a generation ship where time dilation does the forgetting for you, splitting one crew into two civilizations separated by centuries. The mission did not simply fail, it mutated into the birth of one of science fiction's most enduring monsters, the Black Box. A ship full of condemned prisoners is hurtling toward a black hole on a mission they were never really meant to survive. That is High Life, the 2018 film directed by Claire Denis and starring Robert Pattinson and Juliette Binoche. A crew of death row convicts is sent on a one-way deep space mission toward a black hole, supposedly to harvest its rotational energy. The prisoners were told the mission had scientific purpose, but they are really expendable subjects in a fertility and survival experiment run by Dr. Dibbs, played by Binoche. As the years drag on, the crew dies off. The stated mission phrase, and Monty, played by Pattinson, is left raising a child born aboard the ship, drifting toward the black hole with no real destination left. The mission here was a lie from the moment of launch, a cover story for an experiment, so the crew was forgotten before they ever left. The origin. A handful of strangers wake from hibernation on a colony ship and find the crew gone, the ship damaged, and no one who remembers what the mission was supposed to be. That is Origin, a YouTube premium science fiction series released on November 14th, 2018. The passengers had boarded the colony ship Origin to settle Theia, an Earth-like planet meant to give them a fresh start. The lead characters wake far too early to find the ship suffering major structural damage and the entire crew missing. And the season unfolds through flashbacks to each survivor's own origin story, explaining how they ended up fleeing Earth in the first place. With the crew gone and the systems failing, the colonists have to piece together what happened, and whether the mission to Theia is even possible anymore. Starring Tom Felton and Natalia Tena, and cancelled after a single season, Origin is the abandoned mid-voyage variant. The mission stranded the moment the crew vanishes. The simulation. For 50 years, the crew believed they were halfway through a 100-year voyage to another star, until the truth turned out to be far stranger than space. That is Ascension, a 6-episode science fiction miniseries that aired on Sci-Fi in the United States and CBC in Canada, premiering on December 15, 2014. The crew believes the USS Ascension launched in 1963 on a 100-year generation ship voyage to Proxima Centauri, and that they are now 50 years into the trip. The twist is that the ship never left Earth. It is an elaborate simulation built inside an underground bunker, monitored without the inhabitants ever knowing. The project, run by a man named Harris Ensman, is a multi-generational eugenics and psychology experiment, an attempt at what its architects call punctuated evolution, designed to study how humans would adapt to a long voyage and to breed a special kind of being. The crew has lived their entire lives inside the lie, their mission a fiction maintained by outsiders they never see. It is the most paranoid entry here, the one where even the audience is fooled right up until the reveal. Eligius Three, a colony ship launched before the apocalypse to settle a distant world, and the descendants who survived built a cult around forgetting where they came from. This is The 100, the CW science fiction series that ran from 2014 to 2020, where the Eligius Corporation's deep space program becomes central to the later seasons. Eligius 3 was an interstellar colony ship launched before the show's first nuclear apocalypse, tasked with settling as many as 5 potentially habitable worlds and leaving mission teams behind on each one. One of those teams reached the moon called Sanctum, where the descendants of the original colonists survived for generations and lost the original colonization purpose entirely. The founding leaders, known as the Primes, became near immortal through mind transfer technology and ruled as a quasi-religious society that had forgotten what Eligius was ever sent to do. A later ship, Eligius 4, was repurposed into a prison mining vessel, which shows just how thoroughly the program's original goals decayed. The 100 stretches the trope across an entire colony program, where one ship's descendants build a cult of forgetting, while another is reduced to a floating prison. The Avalon. A starship carrying 5,000 sleeping colonists hits an asteroid, and one man wakes 90 years too early to a voyage that will end long after he is dead. That is Passengers, the 2016 film directed by Morton Tildum and starring Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence. The starship Avalon carries 5,000 colonists and 258 crew in hibernation on a 120-year voyage to the planet Homestead 2. 30 years into the trip, an asteroid strike damages the ship and malfunctions a single pod, waking the engineer Jim Preston 90 years ahead of schedule. The damage cascades, the ship's automated systems fail to correct themselves, and the entire colony mission is threatened by a malfunction that no living crew is awake to fix. Passengers is the mission betrayed by malfunction entry, a voyage intact in theory but quietly breaking down in practice, with the crew sleeping right through their own mission's failure. The Endless Void. A routine 3-week ferry to Mars gets knocked off course by a single piece of debris, and that small accident becomes a one-way drift into infinity. That is Aniara, the 2018 Swedish and Danish film written and directed by Pelle Kagerman and Hugo Lilja, adapted from Harry Martinson's 1956 narrative poem. In its future, Earth is a dying wasteland, and enormous city-sized ships ferry settlers to Mars. The Aniara is one such liner, and the voyage is meant to take only 3 weeks. Then, a collision with space debris forces the ship to dump its fuel and knocks it off course, leaving the Aniara unable to steer toward Mars or back toward Earth. The crew keeps insisting they will find some celestial body to slingshot themselves back on track, but year after year passes with no rescue. As hope dies, the passengers turn first to a sentient AI called the Mima for comfort, and then, as that fails them, to cults and despair, with the ship slowly becoming their entire world. Decades go by, and the mission to Mars is utterly forgotten, replaced by the grim reality that the Aniara will drift through empty space forever, its passengers living and dying aboard a vessel going nowhere. The film ends millions of years later with the Aniara still drifting, a silent tomb among the stars. It is the most haunting, forgotten mission story ever filmed, a ship that loses its destination to one trivial accident and becomes a generation ship by default, the bleakest possible answer to what happens when a ship forgets where it was going. If this was worth your time, consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the future uploads. Thanks for watching.